Rachel Brown believed money could buy anything, even freedom. Imagine the sheer audacity, walking into a divorce hearing, hand in hand with a mistress, wearing a smile that screams of premature victory. He viewed his wife, Catherine, as nothing more than a quiet fixture he could discard like last season's luxury car, convinced the law was on his side. But Rachel forgot a critical rule. In the game of chess, the queen is the most lethal piece on the board. You are not going to believe the look on his face when the judge drops a bombshell that changes everything. Buckle up. This is the billionaire's downfall. The air outside the New York County Supreme Court on Center Street was thick with humidity and the chaotic energy of the press. Cameras flashed in a strobe light frenzy, the shutter clicks sounding like jagged applause. They were waiting for him. Rachel Brown stepped out of the black Cadillac Escalade like a king descending from a throne. At 52, he was the picture of American corporate vitality, silver fox hair perfectly coiffed, a jawline that seemed carved from the granite, and a custom navy Brioni suit that cost more than the average sedan. He was the CEO of Brown Dynamics, a logistics and tech conglomerate that effectively moved half the world's goods. He was a man who moved mountains with a phone call. But today, he wasn't just making a statement with his suit. He turned back to the car and extended a hand. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered paparazzi. Out stepped Tiffany Lacroix. She was 24, a former swimsuit model with blindingly white veneers and legs that went on for days. She wasn't wearing the somber, respectful attire usually reserved for family court. She was in a bright, crimson Versace dress, cut low, with a diamond tennis bracelet glinting aggressively in the morning sun. Rachel pulled her close, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. He looked directly into the lens of a TMZ cameraman and winked. "Are you worried about the settlement, Mr. Brown?" a reporter shouted, thrusting a microphone forward. Rachel didn't break stride. Worried? Why would I be worried about taking out the trash? Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere shifted from chaotic to sterile. The marble floors echoed with the click-clack of Tiffany's stilettos. Rachel felt invincible. His legal team, led by Arthur Pendleton, a man known in legal circles as the Butcher of Broadway, was already inside. Pendleton had never lost a high-stakes divorce. He charged $2,000 an hour, and Rachel considered it a bargain. "Richie, baby," Tiffany whispered, snapping her gum slightly. "Is she going to be there? The old hag?" "She has to be," Rachel smirked, checking his Rolex. "And keep your voice down, Tiff. We want to look dignified, even if we are gloating." They pushed through the heavy oak doors of courtroom 314. The room was freezing. Seated at the defendant's table, looking small and grey, was Catherine Brown. Catherine was 49, but today she looked older. She wore a simple, unbranded charcoal suit that swallowed her frame. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe, sensible bun. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, not even her wedding ring. She didn't look up when Rachel entered. She was staring at a stack of manila folders in front of her, her hands clasped tightly together. Next to her sat her lawyer. Rachel almost laughed out loud. It wasn't a powerhouse from a top-tier firm like Skadden or Cravath. It was Sarah Jenkins, a solo practitioner from a strip mall in Queens. Rachel had looked her up. She handled mostly estate planning and minor custody disputes. This was going to be a slaughter. Rachel guided Tiffany to the front row of the gallery, directly behind the defense table, ensuring Catherine would feel their presence breathing down her neck. "Hey, Cathy," Rachel said, his voice carrying through the quiet room. "You look tired. Rough night?" Catherine didn't flinch. She turned a page in her folder, her movement slow and deliberate. Arthur Pendleton walked over, shaking Rachel's hand. "We're all set, Rachel. The prenup is ironclad. We've successfully argued that Brown Dynamics is premarital property held in the offshore trust. She gets the house in Connecticut and the alimony cap we discussed. She'll be lucky to afford a Honda by the time I'm done." "Good," Rachel said, glaring at the back of his wife's head. "I want her crushed, Arthur. She refused the initial settlement. She wanted to play hardball. Now, she gets nothing." "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison P. Miller swept into the room. Miller was a legend in the Southern District. He was near retirement, a man with bushy white eyebrows and zero tolerance for theatrics. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the rim at the spectacle before him. His eyes lingered for a moment on Tiffany in the front row, then darted to Rachel, and finally rested on Catherine. "Case number 4492B, Judge Miller grumbled. "Brown versus Brown. Let's get this over with. I have a murder trial starting at 2. Arthur Pendleton stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, Arthur Pendleton, representing Mr. Rachel Brown. We are moving for a summary judgment regarding the asset division based on the prenuptial agreement signed in 1998. "I know who you are, Mr. Pendleton," Miller said dryly, "and I see the plaintiff brought a cheerleader section." Rachel stiffened. Tiffany giggled inappropriately. "Ms. Jenkins?" The judge nodded to Catherine's lawyer. "Are you ready to proceed?" Sarah Jenkins stood up. She was short, frumpy, and looked nervous. She fumbled with her glasses. "Yes. Yes, Your Honor. We are ready." Rachel leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs. He caught Tiffany's eye and mouthed, "Too easy." He had no idea that the woman sitting 10 feet away from him, the woman he had ignored for the better part of a decade, was currently holding a grenade with the pin already pulled. "Your Honor," Pendleton began, his voice booming with the practiced cadence of a litigator who loved the sound of his own voice. He paced the floor, commanding the room. "We are here today because Mrs. Brown refuses to accept reality. The facts are indisputable. Mr. Brown founded Brown Dynamics 3 years prior to their marriage. The company and all its subsidiaries are protected assets under the prenuptial agreement dated August 14th, 1998. Pendleton waved a document in the air. This document states clearly that any growth of premarital assets remains the sole property of the original owner. Mrs. Brown has never held a position in the company. She has never attended a board meeting. She has contributed nothing to the empire my client built from the ground up. She was a housewife, Your Honor. And while we respect domestic duties, they do not equate to a 50% share of a multi-billion-dollar logistics firm. Rachel watched Catherine. She was writing something on a yellow legal pad. Probably a grocery list, he thought, or a prayer. Furthermore, Pendleton continued, dropping his voice to a sympathetic register that felt entirely fake. My client has been generous. He offered Mrs. Brown the estate in Greenwich, a lump sum of $2 million, and monthly support of $10,000 for 5 years. She rejected this. Greed, Your Honor, is an ugly thing. Pendleton turned to look at Catherine with a sneer. We ask the court to enforce the prenup, grant the divorce, and deny any claim Mrs. Brown has on the company shares. Judge Miller made a note. Ms. Jenkins, your response? Sarah Jenkins stood up slowly. She didn't pace. She didn't wave her arms. She stood perfectly still behind her table. Your Honor. Sarah's voice was quiet, but surprisingly steady. We are not contesting the validity of the 1998 prenuptial agreement. Rachel blinked. Even Pendleton looked surprised. She's folding, Rachel thought. She's giving up already." "You're not?" Judge Miller asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, Your Honor," Sarah continued. "Mr. Pendleton is correct. The prenup covers the assets as they stood in 1998. However, we are not here to discuss the prenup. We are here to discuss the ownership structure of Brown Dynamics as it stands today, in 2026. Pendleton scoffed loudly. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? The ownership is public record. Rachel Brown is the majority shareholder." "Is he?" Sarah asked. It was the first time she had looked directly at Rachel. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent. Rachel felt a sudden, cold prickle on the back of his neck. "Mr. Brown," Sarah addressed him directly, ignoring procedure. "When was the last time you read the bylaws of your holding company, RS Global Holdings?" "Objection!" Pendleton roared. "Counsel is badgering my client." "Overruled," Judge Miller said, leaning forward. "I want to hear where this is going. Answer the question, Mr. Brown." Rachel stood up, straightening his tie. He wasn't going to let this Queen's lawyer rattle him. "I wrote the bylaws, Ms. Jenkins. I don't need to read them. You wrote them in 2005, when you restructured the company to avoid certain tax liabilities, correct?" Sarah asked, pulling a thick document from her folder. "That's standard business practice," Rachel snapped. "And at that time," Sarah continued, flipping to a page marked with a red tab, "the company was facing a severe liquidity crisis. You needed capital. Fast. The banks had frozen your lines of credit." Rachel's face flushed. He hated being reminded of 2005. It was the only time he had almost lost it all. "That's ancient history. I fixed it." "You didn't fix it alone, did you?" Sarah asked. "You took a private loan, a massive injection of capital from a silent investor to save the company from bankruptcy." "So what?" Rachel said, his voice rising. "I paid that loan back years ago." "Did you?" Sarah smiled. It was a terrifyingly calm smile. "Or did you sign a convertible note of debt?" The room went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Arthur Pendleton froze. He looked at his client. "Rachel, what is she talking about?" "It was a standard loan," Rachel hissed at his lawyer. "I signed 1,000 papers back then." Sarah Jenkins walked around the table and handed a document to the bailiff to give to the judge. "Exhibit A, Your Honor. The convertible note from 2005. It states that the lender, an entity known as Phoenix Trust, had the option to convert the debt into equity, specifically into Class A voting shares, at any time if the original borrower engaged in conduct that threatened the reputation or moral standing of the company." Judge Miller put on his reading glasses. He read the page silently. He looked up at Rachel, then back at the paper. "Mr. Pendleton," the judge said, his voice dangerously low. "Did you know about this?" I was not counsel for Mr. Brown in 2005, Pendleton stammered. "The clause is quite specific," Sarah Jenkins said, her voice gaining strength. "It's a bad boy clause, usually reserved for unruly founders. If the CAO engages in public scandal, adultery that affects the stock price, or criminal negligence, the trust has the right to convert the debt into a 51% controlling stake in Brown Dynamics immediately." Rachel laughed. It was a nervous, jagged sound. "This is ridiculous. Who is Phoenix Trust? Some shell company? I own my company." Catherine Brown finally spoke. She didn't stand up. She didn't shout. She simply turned her head, looked Rachel dead in the eye, and spoke into the microphone. "Phoenix Trust isn't a shell company, Rachel," she said softly. Rachel stared at her. "What do you know about it?" "My father left me an inheritance, Rachel. You always thought he was a broke school teacher. You never knew he held patents for industrial chemical compounds used by DuPont." Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. When you were bankrupt in 2005, Catherine continued, I didn't want to embarrass you. I didn't want you to know your wife saved you. So I set up Phoenix Trust. I authorized the loan. You, Rachel whispered. I own the debt, Rachel, Catherine said. And this morning, at 8 a.m., right after I saw the photos of you and your mistress entering the courthouse, I executed the conversion option. Tiffany Lacroix looked between Rachel and Catherine, confused. Richie, what does that mean? Sarah Jenkins dropped the hammer. It means, Your Honor, that as of 2 hours ago, Mr. Brown is no longer the majority owner of Brown Dynamics. He is a minority shareholder. The majority owner is Catherine Brown. Order! I will have order in my court. Judge Miller slammed his gavel down with such force that the wooden handle cracked against the block. The courtroom had erupted. The reporters in the back were frantically typing into their phones, signaling their editors. This was better than a celebrity murder trial. This was a corporate execution broadcast live. Rachel Brown was gripping the edge of the defendant's table, his knuckles turning white. His face, usually a mask of tanned composure, was now a splotchy crimson. This is fraud, Rachel bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. She forged it. I never signed a deal with Phoenix Trust. I took that loan from a venture capital firm in the Caymans. Arthur Pendleton, sweating through his expensive suit, grabbed Rachel's arm. Sit down, Rachel. Shut up. Don't tell me to shut up. She's lying, Mr. Brown, Judge Miller said, his voice dangerously calm. If you do not sit down, I will hold you in contempt, and you will spend the night in the tombs. Do I make myself clear? Rachel slumped back into his chair, breathing heavily. He looked at Tiffany, who was scrolling on her phone, looking bored and slightly annoyed that the attention had shifted away from her dress. Ms. Jenkins, Judge Miller turned to Catherine's lawyer. This is a substantial claim. You are asserting that the plaintiff, Mrs. Brown, is the beneficial owner of the debt that capitalized Brown Dynamics in 2005? Yes, Your Honor, Sarah Jenkins said, her confidence growing with every passing second. She pulled another binder from her bag. I have here the original wire transfer receipts from 2005. The funds, totaling $50 million, moved from the account of Phoenix Trust, of which Catherine Brown is the sole trustee, directly into the operating account of Brown Dynamics. She walked to the bench and handed the binder to the judge. Tab 3, Your Honor. You will see the signature of the recipient. Rachel Brown. Rachel watched the judge flip to the page. He felt a wave of nausea. He remembered that day. November 2005. The creditors were banging on the door. He couldn't make payroll for his truckers. He was desperate. A broker he had never met, a man named Silas Thorne, who he now realized must have been hired by Catherine, had approached him with a lifeline. No questions asked. Just sign the note. Keep the company. Rachel hadn't read the fine print. He never read the fine print when he was desperate. Mr. Pendleton, Judge Miller said, looking over his glasses. The signature matches the one on your divorce petition. Would you like to examine it? Pendleton walked up to the bench, took the document, and stared at it. He pulled a jeweler's loupe from his pocket, a habit from his days examining evidence, and peered at the ink. He walked back to Rachel, his face pale. It's your signature, Rachel. It's blue ink. You always use blue ink. I thought, Rachel stammered. I thought I paid it back. You paid interest, Sarah Jenkins corrected him from across the aisle. For 20 years you paid interest only. The principal remained outstanding, and the conversion clause remained active. But the clause, Rachel grasped at a straw. The clause says I have to engage in conduct that threatens the company. I haven't done anything. The stock is at an all-time high." Sarah Jenkins smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Exhibit B, Your Honor." She pointed to a large screen mounted on the courtroom wall, usually used for displaying evidence. She clicked a remote. A photo appeared on the screen. It was from 20 minutes ago. It showed Rachel and Tiffany on the courthouse steps. Rachel was winking. Tiffany was laughing. The headline from the New York Post website was already superimposed over it. "Brown CEO treats divorce like a red carpet event. Stock dips 4% in pre-market trading." The clause, Sarah read from the contract, defines triggering conduct as any public behavior by the CEO that brings ridicule, disrepute, or instability to the firm. Bringing your mistress to court in a Versace gown while mocking the judicial process. That is the definition of bringing ridicule to the firm. "The board has been calling me all morning," Sarah added. "They are panicked. They feel Mr. Brown's behavior suggests mental instability." "This is entrapment," Rachel screamed. You waited until I did something stupid." "I waited until you showed the world who you really are," Catherine said. Her voice cut through the noise like a razor. "I covered for you for years, Rachel. When you got the DUI in 2010, I paid the PR firm to bury it. When you harassed your assistant in 2018, I convinced her to settle quietly. I protected the company. I protected you. But today, you wanted a show. You wanted to humiliate me. So I stopped protecting you." Tiffany leaned forward, tapping Rachel on the shoulder. "Richie? Does this mean we aren't going to Paris next week?" "Not now, Tiffany," Rachel snapped. Judge Miller cleared his throat. "The court finds the documentation persuasive. However, this is a complex corporate matter. Mr. Pendleton, do you have any evidence to refute the validity of the Phoenix Trust Agreement?" Arthur Pendleton looked at his client. He looked at the mountain of evidence against them. He looked at the prenup he had been so proud of 5 minutes ago. "Your Honor," Pendleton said, his voice defeated. We request a continuance to authenticate the documents." "Denied," Judge Miller said instantly. "The signature is verified by your own admission. The wire transfers are bank certified. The bad boy clause was triggered in plain sight of this court. I saw him wink at the cameras myself." The judge leaned back. "I am inclined to rule that the ownership of the majority shares has legally transferred to Phoenix Trust as of this morning, which means—" He looked at Catherine. "Mrs. Brown is the majority owner of Brown Dynamics." Rachel felt the room spin. He wasn't just losing half his money. He was losing his identity. He was Brown Dynamics. Without the company, he was just a guy in a suit with a very expensive girlfriend. "Wait," Rachel gasped. "If she owns the company, then—" Sarah Jenkins nodded. "Then we move to the next item of business, Your Honor, since this is now a matter of employment law as well as family law." "Employment law?" Rachel asked, confused. "Check your email, Mr. Brown," Catherine said. Rachel fumbled for his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it once on the marble floor. He picked it up. The screen cracked, a fitting metaphor for his life in that moment. He opened his email app. There was a message at the top of his inbox. Sender, Board of Directors, via Corporate Secretary. Subject, Notice of Extraordinary General Meeting. Resolution. 1. He clicked it. Dear Mr. Brown, pursuant to the activation of the controlling shareholder clause by Phoenix Trust, representing 51% of voting shares, an emergency resolution has been passed at 9:15 a.m. EST. Effective immediately, your position as Chief Executive Officer of Brown Dynamics is terminated for cause. You are required to surrender your company phone, laptop, and access badge immediately. Security has been notified to escort you from the premises should you attempt to enter the building. Signed, the Board of Directors. Rachel stared at the phone. He read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't make sense. Terminated. For cause. You fired me? Rachel whispered, looking up at Catherine. You fired me from my company. It's not your company, Rachel, Catherine said. It's mine. It's always been mine. You were just the face on the magazine covers. You were the one taking the credit while I managed the leverage in the background. Rachel stood up, his legs wobbling. You can't do this. I built those logistics networks. I negotiated the trade deals with China. And you spent the last 3 years on a yacht in the Mediterranean with her. Catherine gestured vaguely at Tiffany. While I was reading the quarterly reports you ignored. While I was advising the COO on how to pivot during the supply chain crisis. Did you think those ideas came from thin air, Rachel? I've been emailing your COO under the alias Phoenix for 5 years. The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical blow. The press was going wild. The flashbulbs were blinding. Phoenix was you? Rachel looked horrified. My COO told me Phoenix was a consultant from McKinsey. He lied to protect my identity, because he knew if you found out your wife was smarter than you, your ego would collapse, and you'd tank the stock price, Catherine said calmly. Arthur Pendleton sank into his chair. He started packing his briefcase. He knew when a ship had sunk. There was no salvaging this. Your Honor, Sarah Jenkins interrupted the domestic drama. Since Mr. Brown is now unemployed and holds only a minority, non-voting stake in the company, a stake that is heavily leveraged against his personal debts, his financial standing has drastically changed. Sarah smiled. We would like to revisit the alimony discussion. Since Mr. Brown currently has no income, and Mrs. Brown is the billionaire owner of a multinational conglomerate, we are willing to be benevolent. Judge Miller hid a smile behind his hand. Go on, Ms. Jenkins. Mrs. Brown is willing to offer Mr. Brown a monthly stipend, Sarah said, pulling a single sheet of paper from her folder, provided he vacates the penthouse by tonight. A stipend, Rachel sputtered. I'm not a child. How much? Tiffany asked suddenly. She had finally looked up from her phone. Her eyes were calculating. $5,000 a month, Sarah Jenkins said. 5,000, Rachel screamed. My suit cost 6,000. That won't even cover the maintenance on the Ferrari. You don't own the Ferrari anymore, Rachel, Catherine said gently. The Ferrari is leased through the company, and since you are no longer an executive, the company is repossessing it. The driver is waiting outside to take the keys. Tiffany Lacroix stood up. The movement was sudden. She smoothed down her red dress. Wait, Tiffany said, her voice sharp. So, he has no company, no jet, and the car is gone? That appears to be the situation, Ms. Lacroix, Judge Miller said, enjoying the show. Tiffany looked at Rachel. She looked at the sweat dripping down his forehead. She looked at his shaking hands. The aura of power that usually surrounded him had evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, aging man in a suit he could no longer afford. Rachel, Tiffany said, I think we need to talk. Not now, Tiff, Rachel pleaded. I can fix this. I'll appeal. I'll sue the board. You signed the note, Rachel, Tiffany said, her voice cold. I heard the lawyer. You signed it. You're broke. She reached down, unclasped the diamond tennis bracelet from her wrist, and looked at it. Then she looked at Catherine. Mrs. Brown? Tiffany called out. Catherine looked at the young woman. There was no hate in Catherine's eyes, only pity. Yes, Tiffany? Is this bracelet company property too? Rachel charged it to the corporate expense account under Client Relations. Catherine nodded. So, technically, yes. It belongs to Brown Dynamics. Tiffany shrugged. She walked over to the defense table and dropped the diamond bracelet onto Catherine's stack of folders. It landed with a heavy clink. "Here," Tiffany said. "I don't date unemployed guys. It's bad for my brand." "Tiffany," Rachel gasped. "I love you. We're soulmates." "We were soulmates when you were buying me an apartment in Soho," Tiffany said. "Now you're just a guy who lives on a $5,000 allowance. Good luck, Richie." She turned on her heel, her stilettos clicking loudly as she marched out of the courtroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind her. Rachel stood alone in the center of the room. The silence was deafening. He looked at his lawyer, but Pendleton was busy studying the floor. He looked at the judge, who was writing on a docket sheet. Finally, he looked at Catherine. "Kathy," he whispered, "please, you can't leave me with nothing." Catherine stood up. She gathered her papers. She picked up the diamond bracelet Tiffany had discarded and dropped it into her purse. "I'm not leaving you with nothing, Rachel," she said. "I'm leaving you with exactly what you brought to this marriage. Yourself." "But the house, where will I go?" "Sarah," Catherine turned to her lawyer. "We have arranged for a 1-year lease on a studio apartment in Queens," Sarah Jenkins said, handing a set of keys to the bailiff to give to Rachel. "It's near the subway, since you don't have a car." "Queens?" Rachel looked like he was about to vomit. "I haven't been to Queens in 30 years. "Then it will be a nostalgic trip down memory lane," Judge Miller said. "Judgment is entered in favor of the defendant, Catherine Brown. The prenup is enforced regarding the 1998 assets, which are negligible. The company ownership is confirmed as transferred to Phoenix Trust. Court is adjourned." The gavel banged. Rachel stood frozen as the room began to clear. The reporters rushed toward Catherine, shouting questions. Mrs. Brown, what's your first move as CEO? Mrs. Brown, are you going to keep the current board?" Catherine stopped at the railing. She turned back to look at Rachel one last time. He looked small, shriveled, and utterly defeated. "My first move," Catherine said, loud enough for Rachel to hear, "is to audit the books. I have a feeling my predecessor was very careless with company funds." She walked out, surrounded by flashing lights, leaving Rachel Brown alone in the cold, empty courtroom. But the story wasn't over. Rachel Brown was a man who had clawed his way to the top once. And as he stared at the cheap brass keys to the apartment in Queens resting in his palm, a dark, desperate anger began to boil in his gut. He wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. He had one card left to play, a card hidden so deep even Catherine didn't know about it. The studio apartment in Queens smelled of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. It was a sensory assault that Rachel Brown had not experienced since his childhood in a trailer park in Ohio, a past he had spent 50 years burying under layers of Italian silk and Swiss banking codes. Rachel sat on the edge of the sagging twin mattress, staring at the peeling beige wallpaper. It had been 3 days since the court hearing, 3 days of hell. He had tried to check into the St. Regis, assuming his credit card might still have a lingering limit. Declined. He had tried to call his friends, fellow CEOs, golf buddies, politicians he had donated millions to. "The number you have reached is not accepting calls from this line." Blocked. All of them. He was a pariah, a radioactive isotope in the social ecosystem of New York's elite. Even the doorman at his favorite cigar bar had pretended not to see him when he tried to walk in yesterday. Rachel looked down at his hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from a withdrawal of power. He needed it like a drug. He looked at the cheap smartphone Catherine's lawyer had provided. It was a prepaid model with a cracked screen. $5,000 a month, he muttered, a dark laugh bubbling up in his throat. "She thinks she can buy me off with pocket change." He stood up and walked to the single window. It looked out onto a brick wall and a fire escape, where a pigeon was pecking at a discarded slice of pizza. Catherine thought she had won. She thought she knew everything about Brown Dynamics. She knew about the finances, the secret loans, the offshore accounts. She was smart, he would give her that. She had played the long game better than he had. But Catherine was a financier. She wasn't an engineer. Rachel reached into the inner lining of his suit jacket, the Brioni suit he had worn to court, now wrinkled and stained. He felt for a small, hard lump near the hem. He grabbed a steak knife from the tiny kitchenette and sawed at the fabric. A moment later, a small silver USB drive fell into his palm. He smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. Years ago, when he was first building the proprietary software that ran Brown Dynamics Global Logistics, the Nerve Center, Rachel had been paranoid. He was afraid of corporate spies, of hostile takeovers, of his own board betraying him. So, he had written a back door into the source code. He called it Protocol 0. It was a kill switch, a simple command line that, once executed, would encrypt the routing algorithms for every ship, truck, and cargo plane in the fleet. It wouldn't just stop the company, it would blind it. Inventory would vanish. GPS tracking would scramble. Within 4 hours, Brown Dynamics would lose billions. Within 24 hours, the stock would be worthless. He couldn't access the system from this cheap phone. He needed a terminal, and he needed someone who could bypass the new firewalls Catherine had likely installed. He needed Eddie, the rat Malone. 2 hours later, Rachel was sitting in the back booth of a dimly lit dive bar in Hell's Kitchen. The floor was sticky, and the jukebox was playing a warped classic rock song. Across from him sat Eddie Malone. Eddie was a disgraced cybersecurity analyst who had done time for hacking the Federal Reserve. He looked like a walking hangover, wearing a greasy hoodie and nervous eyes. "You look like hell, Mr. Brown," Eddie said, sipping a warm beer. "Cut the small talk, Eddie," Rachel snapped. "I have a job for you." "I don't do jobs for you anymore, Richie. I saw the news. You're broke. You're radioactive." Rachel reached into his pocket. He didn't have cash, but he had the one thing the repo men hadn't stripped from him yet, because he had hidden it in his sock during the court hearing. He slammed his watch onto the table. It was a Patek Philippe Grand Master chime. "That watch is worth $2 million, Rachel hissed. "It's yours. All of it. If you do this one thing for me." Eddie's eyes widened. He reached out and touched the watch reverently. "What do you need?" Rachel slid the silver USB drive across the table. "This drive contains a legacy patch for the Brown Dynamics mainframe. I need you to go to an internet cafe, somewhere with a VPN, somewhere untraceable. I need you to inject this code into the external server port." And then, Rachel leaned in, his eyes gleaming with madness. You hit enter, and we watch the world burn. Eddie hesitated. "This is sabotage, Richie. This is federal prison time if they catch us." "They won't catch us," Rachel said. "Catherine is busy auditing the books. She's looking at numbers, not code. By the time she realizes what's happening, the company will be paralyzed. And then she'll have to call me." "Why?" "Because," Rachel tapped his temple, "I'm the only one with the encryption key to unlock it. She'll have to beg me to fix it. And the price for the key? Half the company back. And an apology. A public apology." Eddie looked at the watch, then at the USB drive. Greed won out. He snatched both. "Give me an hour," Eddie said, sliding out of the booth. Rachel sat back in the shadows, waiting. He ordered a whiskey with his last $20 bill. He wasn't Rachel Brown, the divorce victim, anymore. He was Rachel Brown, the terrorist, and he was about to take his wife hostage. At the Brown Dynamics headquarters in Manhattan, the mood was celebratory. Catherine Brown sat in the massive corner office on the 40th floor. The room had been purged of Rachel's presence. The ugly modern art was gone, replaced by calming landscapes. The humidors were gone. The air felt lighter. She was in a meeting with the new board of directors. They were discussing the transition strategy. "The market response has been surprisingly positive, Catherine," said Robert Thorne, the interim CFO. "Investors like the narrative. The woman behind the curtain steps forward." "It's playing well." Catherine smiled, sipping her tea. "Honesty usually plays well, Robert. We just need to ensure the Q3 shipments are—" Suddenly, the lights in the office flickered. A low, mechanical hum started to emanate from the walls, the sound of the backup generators kicking in. "What was that?" Robert asked, looking around. Before Catherine could answer, the door to the office burst open. It was the frantic head of IT, a young man named Kevin. He was pale as a ghost. "Mrs. Brown, we have a problem." "Is it a power outage?" Catherine asked calmly. "No, Mum, it's the nerve center. The screens. They're going black." Catherine stood up immediately. "Show me." They rushed to the operations floor. It was usually a hive of activity, with wall-to-wall screens displaying a mesmerizing map of the world, tracking thousands of ships and trucks in real time. Now, the screens were turning into static. One by one, the blue dots representing ships were vanishing. The green lines representing truck routes were dissolving into random code. "What is happening?" Robert Thorne shouted. "Are we under cyber attack?" "It's an internal override," Kevin typed furiously at a workstation. "Someone executed a command with root-level access. It's bypassing all our firewalls. It's encrypting the logistics database. We can't see our inventory. We don't know where our ships are. The captains are radioing in. Their navigation systems just went offline." "Who has root-level access?" Catherine asked. Kevin hesitated. "Only two people. You and Mr. Brown. But his credentials were revoked." "Not his legacy credentials," Catherine realized. Her face hardened. "The old back door." The large central screen turned completely black. Then, a single line of green text appeared, blinking ominously in the center of the dark room. "System locked. Protocol 0 initiated. Contact administrator for key." The room descended into chaos. Phones started ringing off the hook. Clients from Tokyo, London, and Dubai were calling, demanding to know why their supply chains had just evaporated. Catherine stared at the screen. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She walked back to her office and closed the door. She picked up her cell phone. It rang once. "Hello, Catherine," Rachel's voice answered. He sounded drunk on power. "Having a technical difficulty?" "Rachel," Catherine said, her voice icy. "What have you done?" "I just reminded you who really built that engine," Rachel gloated. "You stole the keys to the car, Cathy, but you don't know how to drive it. The entire fleet is frozen. Every minute that system is down costs you. What? $1 million? $2 million? Stop this, Rachel. People's livelihoods are at stake. Medicine shipments, food supplies. Collateral damage, Rachel shouted. You wanted war? This is war. Now listen to me carefully. I want my shares back. I want 51% returned to my name. And I want $10 million wired to an offshore account in the Caymans immediately. If you don't, I throw the encryption key into the Hudson River, and Brown Dynamics ceases to exist. You're blackmailing me, Catherine said. I'm negotiating. Meet me, face to face. Where? The old warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, Building 77. Come alone. If I see police, I destroy the key. You have 1 hour. The line went dead. Catherine lowered the phone. She looked out the window at the skyline of New York. She pressed the intercom button on her desk. Kevin, Yes, Mrs. Brown. The IT chief sounded near tears. Is the trace complete? Yes, ma'am. Kevin's voice shifted. He sounded calmer now. We traced the injection point to a cyber cafe in Hell's Kitchen, and we have the audio recording of your call. Good, Catherine said. Initiate the sandbox protocol. Copy that. Initiating sandbox. Catherine picked up her purse. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a manila envelope. She wasn't going to the Navy Yard to negotiate. She was going to end this. The Brooklyn Navy Yard was desolate, a graveyard of industrial history. The wind howled through the broken windows of Building 77. Rachel paced the concrete floor. He felt electric. He had won. He had proven that he was essential. She needed him. He heard the sound of a car engine. He peeked through a crack in the metal door. A black sedan approached. No police lights, no sirens, just Catherine. She stepped out of the car. She looked immaculate, wearing a white trench coat that seemed to glow in the gloom. She carried a briefcase. Rachel pushed the heavy door open. You came. I had to, Catherine said, walking into the cavernous space. The board is in a panic. The stock is in freefall. Music to my ears, Rachel grinned. He held up a small piece of paper. This is the decryption key, a 64-character alphanumeric code. Without it, your company is dead. And you want the company back? Catherine asked, stopping 10 feet away from him. I want what is mine. I built it. You are just a glorified accountant. Rachel screamed, his voice echoing off the rusty rafters. Admit it, Catherine. Admit you can't do this without me. Catherine set the briefcase down on a dusty crate. She looked at him with an expression Rachel couldn't place. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Rachel, she said softly, do you really think I didn't know about Protocol Zero? Rachel froze. What? I've been reading your code for 5 years, Catherine said. I found the back door in 2021. I knew you kept it there as a security blanket, as a weapon. You're lying, Rachel stammered. If you knew, you would have patched it. No, Catherine shook her head. If I patched it, you would have just built another one. Or you would have done something worse. I needed you to use it. I needed you to pull the trigger. Why? Because, Catherine took a step forward, taking the company in divorce court is a civil matter. It leaves you walking free. It leaves you out there, angry, able to hurt me or the employees. She gestured to the empty air around them. But committing corporate sabotage, holding a public company hostage, demanding a ransom, that's not civil law, Rachel. That's domestic terrorism. That's a federal crime. Rachel's face went pale. The system. It's down. I saw it. You saw a simulation, Catherine said. When your friend Eddie injected the virus, our firewalls diverted it into a sandbox, an isolated virtual environment. The screens at the office went black, yes. But the ships, the trucks, they never stopped moving. The real system is running perfectly fine. The only thing you hacked was a decoy. Rachel backed away. No, that's impossible. You didn't destroy the company, Rachel, Catherine said, her voice hard as steel. You just confessed to a felony on a recorded line, and you just attempted to extort a CEO. Rachel turned to run toward the back exit. Suddenly, floodlights blinded him from the rafters. Federal agents, freeze! The booming voice filled the warehouse. Doors slammed open on all sides. Men in tactical gear with FBI emblazoned on their chests swarmed the room. Rachel stumbled back, covering his eyes. It was a prank. It was just a negotiation. 2 agents grabbed him, forcing him to his knees on the dirty concrete. They cuffed his hands behind his back, the same hands that had held a gavel of power for decades, now bound in plastic zip ties. Catherine watched as they hauled him up. Agent Miller, the lead FBI agent, walked over to Catherine. "We got the accomplice, Malone, at the cyber cafe. He gave up everything for a plea deal. He said Brown paid him with a stolen watch." "It wasn't stolen," Catherine corrected him. "It was company property." She walked over to Rachel. He was weeping now, a broken, sobbing mess. "Why?" Rachel cried out. "Why did you do this to me?" "I didn't do this to you, Rachel," Catherine said, looking down at him. "You did it to yourself. You were so arrogant you thought you could hold the world hostage. But you forgot the first rule of logistics." "What?" Rachel choked out. "Always anticipate the bottleneck," Catherine whispered. "You were the bottleneck, and I just cleared it." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete as the agents read Rachel his rights. The sentencing hearing took place on a Tuesday in November, a grey, sleeting day that matched the colour of Rachel Brown's jumpsuit. Courtroom 314 was packed again, but the atmosphere was entirely different from the divorce hearing 6 months prior. There were no flashing cameras allowed inside this time. The air was heavy, smelling of wet wool and anticipation. Rachel sat at the defendant's table. He looked 20 years older. His silver hair, once his trademark, was thinning and unwashed. He hadn't shaved in days. The arrogance that had defined him, the strut, the wink, the smirk, had been scrubbed away by the harsh, fluorescent lights of federal detention. He scanned the room, looking for a friendly face. He looked for Arthur Pendleton, his old lawyer. But Arthur had distanced himself the moment the FBI indictment dropped, citing a conflict of interest to save his own reputation. He looked for his golf buddies, the senators he had funded, the titans of industry he had dined with. The gallery was full of strangers. And then, in the back row, he saw her, Tiffany Lacroix. For a split second, Rachel's heart leapt. She came, he thought. She still cares. But then he saw the man sitting next to her. He was an elderly oil tycoon from Texas, a man Rachel knew vaguely from charity galas. He was at least 80, breathing with the help of a portable oxygen tank. Tiffany was adjusting the old man's collar, whispering something in his ear that made him wheeze a laugh. She didn't look at Rachel once. She was there for the spectacle. Nothing more. A tourist at his funeral. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Harrison P. Miller entered. By a stroke of judicial rostering fate, the same judge who had presided over the divorce was now presiding over the criminal sentencing, as the case involved the violation of court orders from his bench. "Mr. Brown," Judge Miller began, peering over his spectacles, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen men destroy their lives for many reasons. Greed, lust, anger. But rarely have I seen a man so thoroughly dismantle his own existence out of sheer vanity." Rachel looked down at his shackled hands. "You had a second chance," Miller continued. "The court granted you a clean break. You were given a stipend, a home, and your freedom. But you couldn't accept being a minority shareholder. You couldn't accept that your wife was the true architect of your success. So, you resorted to cyber terrorism against the very company you claimed to love." The judge picked up a piece of paper. "The attempt to paralyze the supply chain of Brown Dynamics put thousands of jobs at risk and threatened critical infrastructure. This was not a prank. It was an act of malice." I just wanted my respect back," Rachel whispered, his voice cracking. "Respect is earned, Mr. Brown. It is not extorted," Miller said. "On the count of attempted extortion in the first degree, and on the count of computer fraud and abuse, I sentence you to 15 years in a federal correctional institution." 15 years. Rachel closed his eyes. He would be 67 when he got out. If he got out. "Take him away," Miller ordered. As the marshals hauled him up, Rachel turned his head. He wasn't looking at Tiffany anymore. He was looking for Catherine. She was standing near the exit. She wore a black business suit, sharp and elegant. She wasn't smiling. There was no gloating in her expression. She simply watched him, a silent witness to the end of an era. "Catherine!" Rachel shouted as they dragged him toward the side door. "Catherine, I'm sorry." Tell them I'm sorry." Catherine didn't move. She watched the heavy door slam shut, silencing his pleas. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the wet pavement. A swarm of reporters was waiting for Catherine. "Mrs. Brown! Mrs. Brown!" a reporter from CNBC shouted. "With the former CEO sentenced to prison, what is the future of Brown Dynamics? Can the company survive this scandal?" Catherine stepped up to the podium that had been set up. She adjusted the microphone. She looked into the cameras, her gaze steady and commanding. "The scandal was not the company," Catherine said, her voice clear. "The scandal was a single individual who believed he was bigger than the collective effort of 50,000 employees." She paused, letting the silence hold the crowd. "Brown Dynamics is not Rachel Brown. It never was. It is the truck drivers who drive through the night. It is the warehouse workers who sort the packages. It is the engineers who write the code. For 20 years I watched from the shadows as they built this empire. Today, I am proud to stand in the light with them." "Will you change the name of the company?" another reporter asked. Catherine smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. "No," she said. "The name stays, but from now on, Brown doesn't refer to a man. It refers to the standard of excellence we uphold. We are Brown, and we are just getting started." She turned and walked toward her waiting car, not a limousine, but a sensible, armored sedan. As she got in, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from her chief operating officer. "Stock is up 12% since the sentencing news broke. The market loves certainty." Catherine replied, "Good. Launch the new logistics initiative tomorrow. We have work to do." She put the phone away and looked out the window as the car merged into the traffic of New York City. She thought about Rachel, sitting in a holding cell, stripped of his suits, his watches, and his name. He had chased the image of power his entire life, never realizing that true power wasn't about being seen, it was about being essential. He was the noise, she was the signal. And finally, the signal was clear. Wow. Wow. 15 years. From a billionaire in a Brioni suit to an inmate in a federal jumpsuit, all because his ego couldn't handle his wife being the boss. Rachel Brown thought he was the king, but he forgot that in chess, the king can only move one square at a time, while the queen can go anywhere she wants. What do you guys think? Did Catherine go too far by setting the trap with the sandbox simulation? Or did Rachel get exactly what he deserved for trying to destroy the company? And let's talk about that mistress, Tiffany, showing up to court with another rich guy? Ice cold. Let me know in the comments. If you were Catherine, would you have visited him in prison, or did she make the right call walking away? If you enjoyed this story of karma, betrayal, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next story. Trust me, the next one involves a lottery winner and a greedy family, and you do not want to miss the twist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.